One. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Nonprofit Productivity Channel and the podcast. We have an incredible guest today with us. He's a YouTuber, he's a productivity expert, he's a GTD enthusiast. And so if any of those things resonate with you, you're really going to enjoy our conversation today with Lucas Prigge. And I've had to practice that a few times because he's from the Netherlands. And we're just really excited that you're with us today, Lucas. And thank you very much. What would you add to that introduction?
Not much. I mean, thanks for having me, first of all, Mike. You did very well with the last name. I know it's difficult for many people, but that is indeed my name. And like you've said, I started out on YouTube. Since then, I've built a business around helping people unlock their creative potential, their productive potential through the smart use of digital tools. And that is what I do through obviously my videos, but also through coaching now, one-on-one programs, online courses, including a TickTick course, which I know we're also going to talk about a lot, the tool TickTick, which is my current favorite. But that is me in a nutshell.
Great. So let's talk about your YouTube channel. You know, there's a lot of people out there who review apps. There's a lot of people out there who talk about productivity. I feel like you've found a very unique niche in kind of looking at all these different productivity apps and how one would practice getting things done, that methodology through those. So where did that idea come from? And what's that experience been like for you?
Yeah, so it actually started out of a need that I had myself. I was using Evernote back then as my primary tool of choice, and it stopped serving me as well after it received some updates, especially on the mobile front. It got slow and buggy. So I started looking for an alternative. And so I looked online, I looked on YouTube for tutorials, how to use these different tools for GTD, which was and still is my primary method of choice. And I found some good stuff. I also found some stuff that looked very polished, in terms of the thumbnail, in terms of the presentation, in terms of the effects. But when it came to the substance, it didn't give me what I was looking for. In fact, the more homemade videos, so to speak, from actual enthusiasts who didn't even do it for a living per se, those are the videos that helped me the most when I was starting with Evernote years prior. So I started on a journey to look for an alternative. And I always wanted to produce something. I have a background in sales, which is basically helping people who've produced something of their own to make it more popular, of course. And I felt this was a good opportunity. So 2 years ago, I just started exploring different apps. I believe I actually started recording my setup with Evernote back then as my first video. But I started looking for other tools, build setups around them, and it's just came to me very naturally. And I discovered, I mean, I knew I had a affinity with operations, but to translate that to GTD setups was an unexpected leap. And now here we are 2 years later, many dozens of tools reviewed later, actually hundreds, but only like 10% make the cuts to a video. And that's how it all started.
How long do you recommend folks like test drive an app? A week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
Ooh. Yeah, that is a good question. I don't think there is one timeline that works best for everybody, unfortunately, because for me, my initial gut feeling usually proves to be right for me. And so it's like 20 to 30 minutes even in some instances tells me all I need to know.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be too presumptuous there and tell people this is the timeline you need. I would say commit to it fully when you test a tool. Give it a real chance, give it a real opportunity. Use the information that's out there, whether it's my videos or anyone else's, to understand what you're committing to, but don't stop before giving it a full actual test drive, testing all the features that you believe may be relevant to your situation, however long that takes.
I think that's great advice. I know for me, I just have so much in my system that's good in a sense that it makes it harder for me to, test out another app, almost like moving a house. It's
Right.
like, do I really want to do that? Because that's not a small endeavor. So let's talk about your shift from Todoist. You were a longtime Todoist user as kind of your daily driver. So you're testing out all these apps on the side, but you're really using Todoist
Yep.
as kind of that daily driver. And then there was an itch, or there was something that made you want to make a shift over to TickTick. So I'd love to hear more about what was the itch that you were trying to scratch there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Todoist was great. It was one of the first apps I discovered upon my journey of finding an alternative for Evernote. I still love how it looks. I love a lot about it. I love how intuitive it is. I love how you can organize it with nested lists. I mean, Evernote doesn't, well, now it does sort of, but back then it definitely didn't even have a checkbox functionality. So the way I would delete tasks, to complete tasks was to actually just delete the note that represented a task. So I had to do a lot of kind of reinterpretation. And that creates a sort of mental strain, which Todoist relieved greatly. However, at some point, I found myself pushing Todoist to its limits, because I'm the type of person who prefers to have a single source of truth, as it's called. So for my projects, my notes, and usually a lot of notes end up as support material for projects. So I would want to create a sort of hub for my projects to live inside of, and not have to move between Todoist and Evernote and Notion or whatever kind of combination of tools. And Todoist, back when I was using it, didn't really have a good solution for it. Now, I did discover at some point that it had an uncompletable feature. So basically what you do is you start the title of a task with an asterisk and follow it by a space, and the checkbox will be removed. Now, that's good because it means you won't accidentally mark it complete. You won't accidentally lose non-actionable information that supports a project. But it was still a workaround, and it was pretty limited in terms of its note-taking functionality. It's not what it's designed to do. In addition, I was getting more and more into technology, or at least into improving my focus, my concentration in the moment, right? So Todoist is an excellent organization tool, but then executing, that's something I got more interested in. And I discovered the Pomodoro method, which is where you take kind of a sprint approach to your work. You take, for example, 25 minutes, you commit to a task or to a context without distraction, take a 5-minute break, and repeat 4 times in a row. Then you take a longer break. Now, obviously, you can do that with a simple timer. So obviously that it's not really a deal breaker. But then after I got 20 tools in my journey on YouTube, I ran into TickTick.
Yeah.
And at first, I wasn't impressed with what I saw, because I'm not a fan of TickTick's design, especially compared to Todoist. I thought, okay, this is just going to be one of the many average ones, so to speak. It will make the cut, but not more than that. But as I got more into it, I discovered so many features that aligned exactly with what I was looking for, but not too much. There's also tools that do way too much, and they overwhelm you from a personal productivity standpoint. But it seemed like TickTick just ticked so many boxes for me at that point, with advanced notes, with this separate item type that allows you to combine actionable and non-actionable information without workarounds, with an integrated Pomodoro timer, which obviously is very easy to use. You hit start, it does the work for you. You can even configure it. And also the habits view. That is another component I got into. I love how they separate those from routines, where you can obviously set up a repeating task if you want to build a new habit, but it's going to be on the same level as any other task. It's not, the distinction is harder to make. Whereas with TickTick, it's really a separate taxonomy, a separate item type. So those, at some points, I couldn't justify continuing with Todoist, and now it's been over a year with TickTick, I believe, and I am considering an alternative at this point.
Oh boy.
Yeah, we can get into that later, but still, it is one of the very best tools I've ever used, and I can still recommend it to anyone.
It's amazing. I mean, I think certain apps have like a delight factor. And for me, TickTick has a number of them. Like, I mean, I love the aesthetic of Things 3, but I just can't use it because the fonts don't get bigger. And it drives me insane that you can't star or pin a particular task. I just find that like a deal breaker. I love the review function in OmniFocus. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And I also, wish that you could have Kanban boards in OmniFocus. You know what I mean? So
Yep.
there's so many. Whereas in TickTick, I know for me, pinning a task is huge. Converting a task to a note is incredibly powerful.
Yes.
Boards view, list view is very powerful. The habits, very powerful. The way when I send things to it, an article renders a little bit differently from just like another kind of item that I would use in the share sheet now. There are half a dozen just absolutely delightful features in TickTick. For you, you've mentioned a few of them already. What are two or three that really just put a smile on your face when you use TickTick?
I would say another one is the email integration. I subscribe to a couple of newsletters, and there it especially comes in handy because what TickTick does with its extension is it not only allows you to save an email and then position it as a task. You can click on it. That's what it does with its web clipper already, but it also saves the contents of an email. So I can just forward those newsletters if I want to read that particular issue later as a reading item, a reading task into my TickTick system, and not have to click away from it, even go online if I'm offline for whatever reason. It's right there. Now, I can make comparisons with Evernote there because Evernote is still, to me, one of the very best in that department. When it comes to web clipping, it is the very best. You can save a web page with its contents and store it inside of Evernote. I really wish TickTick would do that too. I will release a video on that soon, actually, my TickTick wish list. But still, the email clipper is a good tool. What I also really enjoy is what you mentioned there, the ability to pin. And I do that personally with my filters. So I, as I said, use GTD, and I want to have a distinction between actions that are available, in other words, next actions, and actions that may be for later or someday maybe items, and you name it. But sometimes an action that is not available will have its context already known. So I also use a tag for that. Now, if I only click on the context tag, I'm going to see both. So the filter allows me to combine next actions with a context and have that next action context view. I save it, I pin it to the top, and I can easily switch between those modes depending on what context I'm in. And for me, I have the luxury that virtually all of my to-dos take place behind a screen. So especially for folks like myself who are like knowledge workers, who also use the computer for most of their to-dos, that can be really powerful. For example, by saving tasks in filters dedicated to a particular software that you use. That could be a context. In the end, though, that's very personal, but I found this to work really well for me.
Yeah. And the notes is just unbelievable. I mean, I can't tell you, I have a silly little project, but it's an important one where I coach one of my kids' basketball teams. And so, I've got a project and I'm using Kanban boards, and here's everything before a game needs to be done, everything after a game. Here's, all of my meeting notes, all of my game notes, all of my observation stats. It's just unbelievable. And I can print right from there. It's just, it would be really hard for me to imagine another tool that at least meets those particular needs. Let's talk about, for those who are listening, who are in the nonprofit space, and maybe they're saying, look, Lucas, I get it. That sounds really neat. You're a tech guy. You love gadgets and apps, and you're really good at this. But I like a pad of paper. I like a pen. I use technology because I have to, not because I really enjoy it. And I don't know if I want to settle on one to-do list app. What would be your advice there as a coach, as a productivity consultant?
Well, my advice might surprise you. I think it's a great question, and it is to use what works best for you. So, as much of a fan of TickTick as I am, if pen and paper works best for you, use pen and paper. What I'm here to do, first of all, is to inform you of the benefits and limitation that every approach has. I guess with TickTick, you could say, or any other digital tool for that matter, is yeah, you will need a screen in order to use it, right? Pen and paper in that sense is not dependent on an internet connection as well. Now, personally, I don't see myself doing it, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. What I would say also is try and dedicate some time to really deeply learn about a tool. If that's going to be TickTick, if you've been following me, I can help you with that. That's great. If you're following, if you like someone else and they know all about another tool like Asana, that's great. But I feel like some of it intimidates people at first sight, like you just illustrated with the quotes that you said. Yeah, you're a tech guy. You're a tech guy. I don't even see myself that way. I feel like what I teach and the tools that are out there, they can be very beginner friendly. Actually, I try to filter out the tools that I talk about on my YouTube videos that I don't consider beginner friendly, because one of my goals is to have everybody become more productive. And I feel like a lot of people are kind of sitting on gold mines that they just don't have access to because they never did kind of a brain dump, for example, which is a simple exercise that any tool should support. And TickTick does that too with its inbox, for example, right? And so I would invite those people who feel that way to consider, is my current system that is pen and paper based working well for me? Is it doing the job? Or am I running into bottlenecks? Mm-hmm. If the answer is no and it's working great, then keep doing it. I'm not here to convince you otherwise. But if you are running into bottlenecks, then I would invite you to just block some time and really study it, because it's easier than you think. The learning curve is not as, especially not as long as you may think it is. You can get used to it pretty quickly because it's designed to be intuitive.
Yeah. And the capture habit within GTD makes it easy. I think, to your point, just capture everything with that particular app for 2 days, 3 days. You'll get a really good feel for what you like about it, what you don't. And
yeah.
So you're a big user of TickTick. You were a big user of Todoist. Are there 2 or 3 other apps that you find yourself recommending to folks often?
Not a lot, really. I would say there are some satellite apps. I learned that term from what's his name, from Tom Solid, another creator recently. I really like that term, but they are supportive and they sometimes serve a super specific function. And one example is Brain FM. And so that loops back into the focus technology that I was starting to look into. That is basically music that is specifically created to enhance focus. But I am a minimalist at heart, and that I apply that also to my digital life. I don't have an extensive setup that's composed of dozens of different apps. I use TickTick for as much as I can. At times, I do use Google Suite for more elaborate writing exercises, or if I need to collaborate with someone. But I feel like that is so standard. I most of the time don't even need to recommend it. Everybody knows about it. Pretty much everybody already uses it. So I'm just looking at my Mac here in front of me really to see, am I actually skipping on some things? But when it comes to personal productivity, no, I use a calendar. I use Google Calendar to manage my time. And I use TickTick for most of the rest, really. That's about it. It's not that exciting or intimidating, but it works really well. And I think part of the reason it works well is because it is so simple and minimalist, because I have the single source of truth and I don't have to keep updating all these systems. I don't have extensive Zapier connections that could break, and I spend so much time maintaining it. Yeah, it's just TickTick pretty much.
I know I saw Culture Code, the maker of Things 3. They just released a new update, which really focused on shortcuts,
Mm.
Apple shortcuts. And I was very critical of that because I said, in my experience, the only people who are using shortcuts, are not really the masses, shall we say. It's a very select
Mm.
niche, and they're probably very productive and all that, but I don't think the average person is probably using shortcuts. So I appreciate the simplicity of your approach and the tools you use. You hinted earlier that you might be considering a successor to TickTick. Can you
Yeah,
share any news with us?
sure.
Breaking news?
No, absolutely. So I don't have a concrete option in mind yet. I have a couple of candidates in mind, but I think what's more interesting is the why, because as people who are listening to this may start to grasp from what I'm saying, is that I try to evolve the tools that I use to accommodate my needs and not the other way around. I don't limit my needs based on the options I have in front of me, and nobody has to do that because there are so many good options on the market. Now, as good as TickTick is, as much as I love about it and as well as it served me, I am running into a frustration more and more, which is, to use jargon, the lack of sequential project support. Now, that may warrant some explanation here, so I'm going to keep it as brief as I can. So first of all, let's define a project. That is an outcome that you're trying to get to from point A to point B that requires more than one step to get to, more than one subtask. So for example, let's say, well, I have a microphone here in front of me. Let's say I want to purchase a new microphone with better quality. Okay, step one would be to research the options. Step two would be to find options that are available to me actually in my local area that I can actually purchase. Step three, to purchase it. Step four is to actually wait for the delivery. So it's an action that someone else performs for me. And step five would be to kind of install it, configure it, and test it. So that's, I think, a brief example of a project. What this is also an example of is a sequential project, which means that every step follows in a particular order. It's a sequence, as the name implies. Whereas a parallel project is more simple and more classic, where they can be performed in any random order. Right. Now, most to-do apps have no problem with parallel project. That's the simple part. That's pen and paper even. Mm-hmm. With sequential projects, what I want to be able to do is preload the project into my system to feed all the information, for example, during a weekly review, where I structure my lists and everything for the week ahead, and not think about it after. I want to use my to-do app as little as possible. So I mentioned before that I have these filters that make a distinction between available and unavailable actions. Well, right now, whenever I have a sequential project, even if it's preloaded with a Kanban view, so I click on the list, it looks nice from left to right like a pipeline, I still have to manually assign the next label once the next step becomes available and I hit complete on the previous one. And that is a frustration I'm running into. It's bothering me more and more, especially now that I've seen tools including OmniFocus, ClickUp, and Asana or Nirvana. Not saying I'm considering all of those, but the point is the technology, like, it's available. It's possible to create this kind of blocker dependency link between two tasks. And TickTick doesn't do it. Todoist doesn't do it either. And for a long time, I just tolerated it. But that is the reason why I am browsing for alternatives. I'm not actively looking, I would say, but I know what's out there and it may happen. Hopefully TickTick is listening. Maybe they're working on it, but that is the reason.
Well, that's fascinating. I mean, the review functionality in OmniFocus, you would love. I know you have reviewed it, and it does have sequential projects.
Yep, it does. Yep, you're right. It does, and it works fantastically well. Especially with OmniFocus, I recall it doesn't even show actions that aren't available.
Right.
So you really only see what you can do right now, and it automatically just pops up once it becomes available.
Yeah,
which I thought was great.
And you can defer tasks. It's wonderful. The only problem with this conversation, Lucas, is this will prompt me probably for 30 minutes for the rest of today to go back and putter into OmniFocus. So Thanks a lot in advance for
Sorry.
Hey, you mentioned your weekly review, and this
Yeah.
is to me one of the absolute pillars of anybody who really wants to be more productive. And certainly for nonprofit leaders, we just cannot show up for work on Monday winging it. We just don't have that luxury anymore. And to me,
Hmm.
the GTD weekly review is like the anchor of everything for me. I mean, really, I can look at any week and say, if I have a good review on Sunday night, the week is going to go dramatically better. We've had people in the Nonprofit Productivity Summit talk about their weekly reviews. Just give us kind of the Cliff Notes version. Is this on a Saturday morning for you, a Sunday night? How long does your review take? Give us a little peek
Yeah.
behind the scenes.
No, I absolutely agree with how you describe it. I feel the same way, and I usually do it either on a Saturday or on a Sunday, depending what my schedule looks like for the weekend. So I try to dedicate. I usually need, I would say, around 2 hours to fully complete it with full dedication. I actually do have different versions of it. So if I really have a tight schedule, I can do a like most essential version, an essentials version of the review, which is not as elaborate, but the more elaborate one, obviously it includes uh, checking if all my tasks are still relevant, if they are still available, have I neglected keep maintaining some lists, right? Does every active project that I'm pursuing have a next action available? Are all my active projects even registered in the system? So it includes just looking over the system with a lot of attention to those details, because I mentioned earlier, I try to use the app as little as possible throughout the day. I just wanted to tell me, what can I do
Mhm.
now that I am in this particular context at this particular time, and just get going and execute. Inevitably, that means some things are going to slip through the cracks. I'm not going to be able to check off everything perfectly well. Nobody can. So that is really the fail-safe mechanism also. So that is what I do. I also reflect on some like deeper items that I also store in there, like my life goals. How are those progressing? Am I still living in alignment with the vision that I've crafted for myself? Those are things that help me prevent from falling into this autopilot
Mm.
mode of being that would detract me from a vision I may have set 3 months ago. And at the start, just as with New Year's resolution, it's always easy.
Yeah.
You're hyped by the surge of motivation that you feel, but at some point that's always going to decline, and you're going to need a system to
Yeah.
help you stay on track. And that is exactly what the weekly review does.
Mhm.
Some of the things it includes that may not be as obvious, or not everybody may do, but may find interesting to consider, is a digital cleanup exercise. So like I've said, most of my work takes place behind the screen on the computer. And I try to also dedicate time to clear out my folders with files that I no longer need, uninstall software that I no longer use, to just keep my machine running quickly.
Mhm.
So for the most extensive version of the review, that is also a part of it.
Love it. I set up a filter in TickTick to review all projects for a weekly review, and I found that on the iPad, it's a little bit easier on the eyes for whatever reason.
Mm,
It gives a little bit of like a little spacing in between projects, whereas on my Mac, that same filter looks just slightly different. And
interesting.
so, nerdy stuff here, but kind of
No, sure.
interesting. Yeah.
That's
Um,
interesting.
Lucas, I want to be respectful of your time. I feel like we could talk for hours, and I wanted to make sure you have a chance to highlight. You have several, I believe, two fantastic courses online that you offer, and one of them is about TickTick. Whether you're still using it or not, it's still a great resource. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about it?
Sure thing. Yeah, absolutely. I started, as we discussed with YouTube. I shared my knowledge, and some of those videos, especially the TikTok ones, became very popular. They have received hundreds of thousands of views, all videos combined. What that also means is I've been able to receive a lot of feedback through YouTube comments, or people emailing me or DMing me on Twitter, etc., asking questions or telling me about TikTok features that are really important to them. So over time, that turned into a body of knowledge about the user experience on TikTok, and considering that I am still using it, have been using it, and know that so many people left positive feedback on how the initial introduction via YouTube already helped them, I thought to myself, yeah, I can turn this into a deep dive course that isn't really fit for YouTube. It's going to take me a lot of time to produce. It is about 4 hours long. There's a couple dozens of lessons and a lot of homework included. And the point of it is for you to, even if you're a beginner, even if you've never used any productivity tool before, to get comfortable with it, to ease into it, to start exactly like you've actually said yourself with the capturing habit. So it follows some of the GTD principles too, and it all combines it with an actionable course that you can follow in your own time. It is self-study, but it is all video with homework, so you can pause, replay if you feel like you need to rewatch something that was difficult to understand. Try to make it beginner friendly, but it ends up being a fully fledged personal productivity system that I use to this day. And you can find it on my website, which I'm sure we will link somewhere in the podcast description. So that is what you can do with it.
Great. Yeah, we will certainly link to it. And I haven't taken it, but it looks like a fantastic resource. And really, I find these online courses specific to apps, I think they're one of the great joys of trying to grow in productivity, just to take some time and pour yourself a good drink or a good cup of coffee.
Yeah, sure.
Just give yourself permission to go deep. And a course like yours, I think, is just the perfect way to do that. So for those who are interested in either Todoist or TickTick, we'll definitely make sure we link that. Lucas, thank you so much for your advice for our nonprofit leaders. Thank you so much for your counsel. We wish you all the best as you continue to just build out these great resources, and we hope to have you back sometime soon.
Thank you, Mike. It's been great being here. Let's stay in touch. It's been great. Thank you.